My name is Evelyn Carter, and if you told me a year ago that my own family would leave me standing alone on a street corner with just $8 to my name, I'd have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. The pavement felt colder than the wind that evening as I watched my son's car turn the corner, leaving me behind. $8. That's all my daughter-in-law Kimber threw at me right after she told Grant to drive away. 8 crumpled bills landed at my feet, as if I was some stranger begging for help. That should cover your bus fare home, Evelyn. Kimber had said, her words sharp, her tone so polished with years of hidden hostility. Maybe next time you'll think twice before freeloading. Freeloading? The word bounced around my mind, echoing with every painful throb in my arthritic knees as I bent to pick up the money. 37 years as a nurse, every penny pinched and saved to help Grant finish college. And now I was being called a freeloader. Grant didn't even meet my eyes. My own son, the boy I raised alone after his father left when he was 5, just sat behind the wheel, face blank, knuckles white on the steering wheel, when I looked at him, searching for some hint that he might defend me, that he might stand up to his wife. Grant finally said, "Mom, you're just being too sensitive. Kimber's right. We can't take care of everything for you." That hurt more than the biting. Wind, too sensitive. Like the years I spent working double shifts to keep Grant in school. The times I watched his kids so he and Kimber could travel, like all of that was just me being overly emotional. That was the last thing I expected to hear. I clutched my purse to my chest and stood there on an empty street corner in a part of town I didn't recognize. The sunset sinking fast, shadows stretching across the cracked sidewalk. I was 65 years old and I'd never felt so invisible. But apparently that didn't matter to them. All this began over something so small. My apartment was being fumigated, and I asked if I could stay with them for 3 days. Not a month, not even a week, just a few nights on their couch. I didn't want money. I didn't want them to change their schedules. All I needed was a place to sleep. Kimber didn't even look up from her phone. "You'll disrupt our routine," she said, as if I were an unwelcome houseguest. "The kids have school. Grant has work. You'll just be in the way." I reminded her I'd been watching those kids every weekend for 2 years. I never once said no when they called. Kimber's face twisted with something ugly. "That's different. That's family helping family. This is you expecting us to drop everything for your problems." The hypocrisy took my breath away. I looked at Grant and said quietly, "I raised you alone. I worked nights to make your games, your school events. I never asked anyone for help." Kimber was quick to respond, "Maybe you should have. Maybe if you'd planned better, you wouldn't need us every time something goes wrong." That's when Grant spoke up for her. "Kimber has a point. Mom, you're an adult. You should handle these things yourself." Their words sliced through me, each one sharper than the last. This wasn't about me running to them for help. This was about family being there for each other. But apparently I was the only one who remembered what that meant. Now I stood there, clutching $8 and trying to figure out how to get home. I found out from a man at a gas station that the nearest bus stop was 3 blocks away, but the buses had already stopped for the night. A taxi would cost at least $20, money I didn't have, so I started walking. My feet ached in. The sensible shoes I'd worn for what I thought would be a family dinner. Every step reminded me how thoroughly I'd been cast aside. Like an old chair too battered to keep around. The only place with its lights still on was the corner convenience store. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, looked up as I entered. "You okay, ma'am? You look like you've been crying." I touched my cheek and found it wet with tears I didn't even know were falling. "I'm fine," I lied. "I've been lying for years, pretending everything was fine. Just need to use your phone to call a cab." The clerk shook his head. Apologetic. "Phone's busted, but there's a payphone outside." Of course, this night couldn't get any worse. I stared at the $8 in my hand. The payphone would take 50 cents, leaving me with $7.50, not enough for a taxi, not enough for anything that would get me home. That's when I noticed the lottery machine in the corner. I've never been much of a gambler. Never bought. Scratch-offs, never played the numbers. But standing in that glaring fluorescent light, clutching the crumpled money my daughter-in-law threw at me, something inside me shifted. "Does that lottery machine work?" I asked the clerk. He nodded. "Powerball's tonight. Jackpot's up to 62 million. 62 million. I thought about Kimber's collection of designer bags, about the kitchen she'd remodeled twice while I was eating peanut butter, sandwiches to make my social security stretch. I surprised myself when I said, "I'll take one ticket, quick pick." The machine hummed. $5 gone, leaving me with 3. I folded the ticket and slipped it into my purse, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of defiance. Let them call me too sensitive, let them call me a freeloader. I'd spent my whole life taking care of other people, maybe. It was time to take a chance on myself. The walk home took me almost 2 hours. My feet ached, my knees burned, and every cruel word replayed in my head with each step. But as I walked, something inside me hardened, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. By the time I reached my little apartment, I made a promise to myself. Win or lose, something had to change. I was done being their emergency babysitter, their backup plan. Their convenient afterthought. I was done being too sensitive for caring about the way I was treated. Maybe, just maybe, I was about to matter more than they could ever imagine. When I finally stepped into my apartment, it felt like a tomb. The silence pressed in on me, heavy and absolute. I locked the door and leaned against it, letting myself cry for a while. Not the quick, controlled tears I'd learned to hide over. The years, but the kind that come when you realize just how much you've lost and how alone you really are. The lottery ticket was already forgotten in my purse. I put the rest of my money on the counter, 3 wrinkled bills that represented everything my family thought I was worth. It should have been humiliating, but underneath the pain was a stubborn flicker of defiance. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the last of my hope burning out. For a week, I went through my days like a ghost. No calls from Grant, not a single text from Kimber. The house was quiet except for the sound of the refrigerator humming and my own footsteps echoing down the hallway. I made tea, stared out the window, and tried to convince myself I'd made it through worse. But nothing felt quite as sharp as the realization that the people I'd loved most were perfectly fine pretending I didn't exist. On the 7th day, as I sat in my worn armchair nursing another cup of tea, the television droned on in the background. I wasn't even paying attention to the lottery drawing. It was just background noise, a distraction from the emptiness that filled the room. The ticket was still crumpled in my purse, shoved between my wallet and a half-used book of stamps. Tonight's winning numbers are 11, 23, 31, 44, 59, and Powerball 5. I almost didn't check. Why would I? Things like this didn't happen to women like me. But something may be boredom. Maybe fate made me fish the ticket out of my bag and smooth the wrinkles so I could see the tiny numbers in the soft lamplight. I read the numbers once, twice, my heart stuttered. The numbers matched. Every single one. I grabbed my glasses, checked again, then again, trying to find a mistake. But the truth stared back at me undeniable. I turned up the TV, waiting for them to repeat the numbers, needing anyone to confirm what I was seeing. When the announcer read them out a second time, I pressed my hand to my chest and just sat there, stunned. $60-2 million. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the ticket. I laid it on the kitchen table like it was made of glass and just stared at it. It felt like a dream, like something that had happened to someone else, but there it was. The proof that everything could change in an instant. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my kitchen as the hours crawled by, the city outside going from darkness to dawn, and tried to imagine what my life could look like now. Not what Kimber and Grant thought I deserved, but what I might choose for myself. I decided not to tell anyone, not yet. I needed time to think. I needed space to breathe. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Kimber. For a split second, I hoped it would be an apology. Maybe something real. I should have known better. Stop being so dramatic, Evelyn. It was just a joke. You're acting like we left you for dead. Grant feels bad about the other night. Maybe we can do dinner this weekend if you promise not to make a big deal out of everything. A joke. Leaving me in a strange neighborhood with $8 was a joke to her. And now she was offering to let me back into their lives if I could swallow my hurt and pretend nothing happened. The casual cruelty took my breath away. For years I jumped at any chance to patch things up, even if it meant pretending their slights didn't matter. But that was before. Before I realized what I now held in my purse, I typed out a reply with steady hands. I'm busy this weekend. Her response was almost instant. Busy with what? You never do anything. The insult was so quick and so normal that I felt a wave of old pain. But instead of replying, I turned off my phone and got dressed. I had more important things to do than beg for scraps of attention. When I walked into the lottery office, it didn't look like what I expected. I imagined marble floors and important-looking people, but instead it was just an ordinary office. Building downtown with harsh lighting and thin carpets. A woman named Megan sat behind the glass. She looked at me, saw my trembling hands, and smiled. "First-time winner?" She asked gently. "First-time player," I admitted. She checked the ticket once, twice, 3 times, and then smiled. "Congratulations, Miss Carter. You're the winner of $62 million. Hearing it out loud made me lightheaded. Megan explained my options, lump sum or payments, taxes, legal stuff. She told me to get a lawyer and an accountant. She told me to think carefully before I made any big decisions. "Money changes people," she said, her eyes soft. "Sometimes in ways you can't imagine. Take your time before you tell anyone. Money changes people." I thought about Grant's silence, Kimber's dismissiveness, their easy willingness to cast me aside. Maybe I needed to see what they'd do if they thought I had nothing left to give. Maybe I needed to know who they were before I let them know about this new life. The next days felt surreal. I walked through the grocery store, standing in front of the expensive steaks I always passed by, knowing I could buy the whole meat department if I wanted. But I still bought my usual chicken thighs and the day-old bread. Old habits, I guess. But I felt different inside, like I was walking through the world with a secret. And for the first time in decades, that secret was just for me. On Thursday, the phone rang. Grant. My heart thudded. Was he calling because he missed me, because he cared? I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Mom." His tone was careful, almost rehearsed. "Listen, about the other night, Kimber feels bad. She was just stressed out. The kids had stuff for school, she was overwhelmed. Anyway, we were wondering if you could watch Ava and Lucas Saturday night. We got tickets to that new show downtown and our babysitter canceled. So that was the reason. Not because they cared, but because they needed something." I took a breath and said, "I can't." There was a pause. "What do you mean you can't? You never have plans." "I'm busy," I said, and it was the truth. Busy with what? The irritation was there, creeping into his voice, like I was failing at my only purpose. Find another babysitter, Grant. I hung up and turned off my phone. In the quiet of my apartment, I realized how good it felt to say no. To finally stop giving and giving to people who only noticed when I stopped. That weekend, instead of babysitting so they could have a $300 date night, I met with the lawyer Megan recommended. His office felt safe, the kind of place where you could talk about anything and know it wouldn't go any further. "You want to keep this quiet for now?" he asked. "That's smart. Gives you a chance to make good decisions before everyone starts pulling at you. You'd be amazed at how quickly people's behavior changes once they know you have money." I thought about Kimber's message, about Grant's call. They didn't love me, not really. They loved what I did for them. I told the lawyer, I want to set some things up before anyone finds out. I want to be prepared. He smiled and told me it was the smartest thing he'd heard in years. When I left his office, my phone buzzed with another message from Kimber. "Really, Evelyn, you couldn't help us one night? Grant is so disappointed in you." I stared at the message, thinking about the $62 million secret I was holding and the years of disappointment that had gone only one way. They had no idea what real disappointment looked like. But they were about to learn. The days blurred together after that, each one a test of my new resolve. Every time my phone lit up with a message from Kimber or a call from Grant, I let it go to voicemail. My heart would leap, then sink, as if expecting some change, a moment of real regret or kindness, but it was always the same. A mix of irritation, guilt-tripping, or another request for help. Never an apology. Never a real question about how I was doing. On Tuesday, as I sat sipping weak coffee and watching the rain beat against the kitchen window, my chest began to ache. It was sudden, sharp enough to make me drop my mug, sending coffee splashing across the counter and shattering ceramic on the floor. For a moment, fear tightened its grip around my heart. I sank into the nearest chair and tried to breathe slowly, waiting for the pain to fade. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the emergency room, the familiar beeping and muted conversations. a sharp reminder of all my years working as a nurse. The young doctor who examined me had bright eyes and a gentle voice. She asked about my life, my stress levels, if I had family who could help. I almost laughed at the question. If only she knew, it's stress-related, she explained after the tests. Your heart is healthy, but your blood pressure's high. Please, take it easy. Do you have someone you can rely on for a few days? The question lingered, floating in the air, and I had no good answer. I walked out of the hospital into cold drizzle, feeling more tired than I had in years. I called Grant, hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. He answered on the third ring. Hey, Mom, I'm at work. What's up? I'm at the hospital, I told him, letting the tremor in my voice slip through. Had some chest pains. This morning. The doctor says it's stress, but she wants me to take it easy for a while. I was hoping I could stay with you and Kimber for a few days, just until I feel steadier. The silence on the other end stretched out long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Grant said, Mom, this isn't a great time. Kimber's got that big work project, the kids have finals, and the house is a mess right now. It's just chaos. I tried to keep my voice calm. I wouldn't be any trouble. I could. Help with the kids, maybe do a little cooking. It's not about helping, he said quickly, almost rehearsed. You know how you get when you're stressed. All anxious and needy. We can't handle that right now on top of everything else. Anxious and needy. That's how my son saw me when I was in pain. Not as the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep him safe and fed, but as an inconvenience. What if something happens? What if I need help? I asked, not even sure why I bothered. You'll be fine, Mom. You're tough. You always figure things out. The confidence in his voice was a wall I couldn't climb. I have to go, Mom. Meeting starts in 5 minutes. And just like that, the line went dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, the taste of betrayal bitter and old in my mouth. That evening, I called again. This time, Kimber answered. Oh, Evelyn, Grant told me about your little episode today. Her words oozed with that full sympathy that always made me feel smaller, not seen. You know, my own mother had the same thing a few years ago, stress-related chest pains. The doctor said it was all in her head. All in her head. As if my fear and pain were nothing more than overactive nerves. You really should learn to manage your anxiety better, Kimber continued. Have you thought about seeing a therapist? There are some good options for seniors. Seniors, she was putting me in a box marked old, fragile, and irrelevant. I was hoping I could stay with you for a few days, I said quietly. Just until I feel steady. Oh, honey, I wish we could help. But the guest room is Grant's office now, and honestly, with your health issues, wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere with proper facilities? Proper facilities. She meant a nursing home, but dressed it up in soft words. I could hear the suggestion rattling inside my skull like pennies in a tin. What kind of facilities? I forced myself to ask. There's that nice assisted living place on Pineview Road, very reasonable rates. Nurses on staff, all kinds of activities. You might actually enjoy it more than being here with our chaos. I felt the blow in my chest. Not only were they refusing to help me, they were using my moment of fear as a reason to push me further away, out of sight and out of mind. I managed, though my voice was thin and flat. It's really for the best. Kimber went on, and now she sounded almost excited, as if the problem of me was about to be solved once and for all. You wouldn't have to worry about groceries or cleaning or any of that domestic stuff, and we could visit when our schedules allow. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in my empty apartment as something inside me finally broke. It wasn't hope. Hope had died on a street corner with $8 in my fist. What broke was the last little belief that blood meant anything at all. That night, I opened my laptop and began researching not nursing homes, but law firms, estate planning, financial advisors who specialized in lottery winnings. If my family wanted to treat me like a burden to be discarded, then I would make sure I was never their burden again. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I want to change my will, I told him, voice steady for the first time in weeks, and I want to set up some trusts. I want to be clear, if anything happens to me, there can be no doubt that my decisions were my own. I want protections against anyone claiming they were caring for me out of love. He listened, made notes, and then said, That's smart, especially given what you've told me. Is there anything else? Yes, I said, my heart thumping with nerves and anger. I want to test them one more time. But I want everything documented. He agreed, and together we made a plan. Over the next week, I called Grant and Kimber with small requests for help. I said I felt dizzy, that my medications were confusing, that I was worried about getting lost on the way to the pharmacy. Each time, their responses were the same: suggestions for cheap senior services, irritation, thinly veiled resentment. Not once did either of them offer to come over. Not once did they say, "We'll help you, Mom." Not once did they show up. Even for a minute by Friday, I had my answer. My family didn't love me, not in any way that mattered. They only loved what I did for them, my free labor, my willingness to put them first, my silence when they pushed me aside. When I was finally inconvenient, when I needed them for the first time in decades, they wanted me gone. The truth should have destroyed me, but instead it set me free. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and I could finally plan my life, without looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to value me again. A strange peace settled over me after that week of quiet tests. There was no more guessing, no more hoping for a last-minute change of heart from Grant or Kimber. I woke up each morning to the simple reality that I was, in every way that mattered, on my own, and for the first time in years, that realization didn't hollow me out. Instead, it started to feel like freedom. About 3 weeks after the hospital, a new invitation arrived, not through warmth, but as a formality. Kimber called one afternoon with her best sugary voice. "We're having a little family dinner Sunday night. Nothing fancy, just us and the kids." Grant thought it would be nice for everyone to spend time together. Grant thought, not we thought. I could hear the old guilt trying to sneak back into my chest, but I forced myself to listen without hope. I played along. "Is there an occasion?" "Oh, just family time." It's been a while. It had been exactly 26 days since they left me on that cold street with 8 crumpled dollars. But apparently we were meant to forget all that. I almost smiled at the predictability of it. "Should I bring anything?" "If you could. Make your potato salad, the one Ava and Lucas like, and maybe pick up some rolls from that bakery. The good ones, that would be great." Even an invitation came with a shopping list. I wasn't surprised. They still wanted me at their table, but only if I arrived with my hands full. What time should I be there? 5:30. "Oh, Evelyn, maybe wear that blue dress you wore." "For Easter, you looked so nice in it." The dress was 3 years old and faded at the cuffs, but in their eyes, it was apparently the best I could manage. When Sunday arrived, I pressed my dress and fixed my hair with trembling hands. I baked the potato salad and splurged on the fancy dinner rolls, carrying both with the careful pride of someone who never wanted to be accused of bringing too little. I tried not to hope for anything more than civility, but old habits die hard. Their house glowed with expensive candles and fresh flowers. Through the window, I could see Ava and Lucas racing around the living room while Grant and Kimber sipped wine on the sofa. It looked like the perfect family gathering, the sort I dreamed about for years. The illusion was comforting and dangerous. Kimber answered the door, dressed in silk and jewelry, her smile wide and brittle. "Evelyn, so glad you made it. Come in, come in." The entryway smelled of roast beef and garlic. Everything was staged, curated to perfection. For a second, it was easy to pretend. Ava darted over, wrapping her arms around my waist. Her hug was the only genuine thing in the room. "Grandma, I got an A on my science project. Want to see?" I kissed her forehead. "Of course, honey, show me after dinner." In the kitchen, Kimber directed me where to put the food, carefully arranging the potato salad and rolls beside her store-bought dishes. "Thanks so much. You always make it just right." Grant gave me a brief, half-hearted hug. "Hey, Mom, good to see you." I studied his face, searching for the warmth that used to be there. But all I found was polite distance, as if we were neighbors instead of family. "How have you been feeling? Any more chest pain?" I nodded, letting my face stay blank. "I'm managing." He smiled. "That's what I figured. You're tough." That word again. I was only ever tough when it meant they didn't have to worry about me. Dinner began pleasantly enough. The kids laughed about school and friends. Grant talked about his job, and Kimber gossiped about the neighbors. I let myself slip into the fantasy that I belonged here, that this was family, that maybe the past month could be forgiven if we all just pretended. But halfway through the meal, the illusion broke. Grant set down his fork and cleared his throat. "Mom, Kimber and I have been talking." We think it might be time for you to consider some lifestyle changes. My heart sped up. What kind of changes? Kimber leaned forward, voice soft and serious. We're worried about you living alone, especially after your health scares. What if something happens? There's no one there to help. I tried to. Keep my hands from shaking. I have neighbors. I can call for help if I need to. That's not a long-term solution, Grant cut in. You're 65 now. These things are only going to get harder. These things meant my existence. My age, my body, my needs. They talked about me like I was a collection of problems to be managed. So, what are you suggesting? I asked, though I already knew. Kimber's eyes brightened. There's a place called Riverbend Manor. It's an assisted living community. Really nice, not too expensive. Nurses on staff, activities, all your meals covered. You'd have peace of mind, and so would we. Grant added, we just want to know you're safe. It would be such a relief. The relief was for them, not for me. I could feel their excitement. This was their solution, their answer to the burden I'd become. I forced myself to keep breathing. Have you already looked into this place? I asked. Oh yes, Kimber said, beaming. I drove by last week. The staff was very friendly, and it's within your Social Security budget if you're careful. They had calculated everything, the cost of my disposal, the convenience of moving me out of sight. How thoughtful. The best part, Kimber added, is that it's only 20 minutes away. We could visit regularly. How regularly? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grant and Kimber shared a look. Well, with our schedules, probably monthly. Maybe more on holidays, monthly. That was what 37 years of sacrifice had earned me. What about the kids? I pressed. When would I see Ava and Lucas? Kimber hesitated. We think maybe their visits should be supervised. Just in case you get upset or emotional, we don't want the kids confused. Supervised? I felt like I was being declared. A danger my love for them turned into something suspect. I think this is best for everyone, Grant said, sounding final. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to be my family. My son calmly discussing my future as a list of problems. Kimber glowing with relief at the idea of getting rid of me. My grandchildren, too young to understand, already learning that love came with conditions. I swallowed hard. I need to think about it. Of course, Kimber said brightly. But there's a waiting list, so if you're interested, we should sign you up soon. They'd been planning this. Tonight was just the official announcement. I excused myself to the bathroom, staring into the mirror at the careful makeup, the blue dress, the hopeful eyes. I saw a woman desperate to be loved, wearing her best and bringing her best. Just to be tolerated, but I wasn't only that anymore. I was a woman with $62 million and nothing left to lose. When I returned to the dining room, the table was still buzzing with forced cheer. I could feel the expectation in the air. They were waiting for me to give in, to thank them for solving the problem of my life. I sat down quietly, folded my napkin, and tried to find my voice through the whirlwind in my head. I've made my decision, I said as calmly as I could. Kimber clapped her hands, smiling so hard it looked painful. That's wonderful. I really think you're going to love it there, Evelyn. Should I call tomorrow and get your name on the list? I looked at each of them in turn, Grant with his nervous fidgeting. Kimber, eyes shining with barely contained excitement. My grandchildren, picking at their food, still innocent. No, I said, my voice steady. I won't be needing assisted living after all. The silence that followed was so sharp I could almost hear it. Kimber's laugh was high and brittle, the kind that tries to turn panic into a joke. What do you mean you won't be needing it? We explained why this is best for everyone. I set my napkin down and took a breath. I mean, I've made other arrangements. Grant leaned forward, lines appearing on his forehead. What kind of arrangements, Mom? You can't just ignore reality. I almost laughed at that. Reality coming from the people who had spent years pretending I was only as valuable as what I could do for them. Actually, I said, reaching into my purse, I think it's time we all face reality. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, a photocopy, not the real thing, which was locked away with my lawyer. I slid it onto the table right in the center, among the expensive plates and fancy glasses. What is this? Kimber asked, her voice suddenly very small. It's a lottery ticket, I said, looking her straight in the eye. From the night. You left me on Willow Street with $8. Grant picked it up, scanning the numbers. What are you trying to say? So you bought a ticket. So what? Check the winning numbers from 3 weeks ago, I said softly. They're right there on your phone. He stared at the paper, then pulled out his phone and started searching. I watched his face change, the color draining out of his cheeks, his eyes widening, his mouth dropping open just a little. He looked up at me, speechless. Kimber grabbed the paper from him, staring back and forth between the numbers and her phone. For the first time since I'd met her, she was at a complete loss. You won the lottery? She whispered, I did. I replied, not smiling, not gloating, just telling the truth. Ava and Lucas had gone quiet, watching the adults with wide eyes. Emma, my Ava, looked between her parents and me, confusion shadowing her face. Why didn't you tell us? Grant's voice cracked. I sat back in my chair, feeling all the years of small humiliations and quiet betrayals balancing on this. One moment. I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I had nothing left to give. I wanted to know what love meant in this family when there wasn't anything in it for you. The truth hung in the air, heavy and unmovable. Kimber opened and closed her mouth, but no words came out. Grant ran his hand through his hair in nervous gesture. I remembered from when he was a little boy and he'd been caught doing something wrong. Mom, that's not we weren't, he stammered. You weren't what? I asked quietly. You weren't trying to get rid of me? You weren't calculating the cost of sending me away? You weren't planning to limit my visits with my grandchildren? Kimber found her voice, but it was brittle and thin. We were worried about you, Evelyn. That's all. We just wanted what was best. Were you? I said. Because from where I'm sitting, it looked like you wanted to solve a problem, an inconvenient, needy, elderly problem. I've spent the past month documenting everything. Every call, every message, every conversation about my future that didn't actually include me. Grant's face was pale. What are you saying? I'm saying I know exactly who you are. When I called scared and in pain, you said I was being dramatic. When I needed help, you offered me a list of care facilities. When you invited me tonight, it wasn't to reconnect, it was to present your plan for getting rid of me. Kimber's eyes were wet, mascara starting to streak. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked. All I've ever wanted was to matter, not for what I could do, but for who I am. All I ever got was a seat at your table if I brought something to it. I reached into my bag again, pulling out a thin folder. This is my new will. I've changed everything. The grandchildren will have enough for their education, but everything else goes to charities for seniors abandoned by their families. I've kept receipts, mortgage payments I helped with, vacations I funded, school clothes, activities, every emergency I covered. Grant, you owe me over $200,000, don't worry. I'm not asking for it back. Consider it my final gift. The room was so silent I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Grandma, why is Mommy crying? Eva asked in a small voice. I looked at her and felt the sharp ache of grief and love mingled together. Because sometimes, I said gently, grown-ups have to learn the cost of their choices. Grant was shaking now. Mom, we can fix this. We made mistakes. You made choices, I interrupted. Over and over, you chose to see me as a problem. Tonight was just the last straw. Kimber's voice was barely audible. What are you going to do? I'm going to live my life on my own terms, without begging for a place at your table. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. I want you to know I don't hate you, but I can't trust you, not after all this. Grant moved, as if to stop me, but I just shook my head. Don't worry about me, Grant. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I always am. I'm tougher than you think. I left the folder on the table. That's for your records. The rest of my story is mine to write. As I walked out of the house, past the photographs on the walls, pictures where I always seemed to be cropped out or left in the background, I felt the weight of my past falling away with each step. I drove home in silence, my phone buzzing. With calls and messages, I didn't answer. Not tonight. Tonight, for the first time, I was truly free. That night, the air outside was cold but bracing as I walked away from my son's house. I felt every step loosen something inside me, anger, regret, the old hunger for their approval. When I reached my car, I just sat behind the wheel and let myself breathe for the first time in years. My phone was buzzing again. First Grant, then Kimber, then Grant again, messages and missed calls stacking up in a desperate cascade. I didn't pick up. I didn't even listen. I let the phone vibrate until the battery died. I drove through my quiet neighborhood, passing houses with windows lit, families gathered around their dinner tables, laughter spilling into the street. It should have hurt, but it did not. Like before. Instead, I felt relief, a strange freedom that was fragile but real. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building and sat for a while, watching the streetlights flicker and the wind blow leaves across the pavement. I had never felt so alone and so unburdened at the same time. The next morning, sunlight spilled into my kitchen as I made coffee. For a long time, I just stood at the window, cradling the warm mug in my hands, watching the city wake up. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder if Kimber or Grant would apologize. I had let that hope go. Instead, I called my lawyer and confirmed the changes to my will, the trusts, the donations. Every detail was in place, every account secure. I wasn't leaving room for doubt, manipulation, or guilt. The days after that confrontation unfolded with a surreal clarity. At first, the calls and texts came every few hours, shifting between frantic apologies and angry accusations. Grant's voice messages teetered between regret and defensiveness, as if he couldn't decide whether to beg for forgiveness or blame me for standing up for myself. Kimber sent long, rambling texts, some sweet, some sharp, all wrapped in the hominy. Same old pattern. We just want what's best for you, Evelyn. Please, let's talk. Let's fix this. I didn't respond. I spent my mornings at the library, my afternoons walking through the city parks, feeling my lungs open and my mind clear. I shopped for groceries and smiled at the cashier. I spent time at the senior center sharing coffee and laughter with women who knew what it was to be overlooked and underestimated. I started a journal. Every page I filled was a reminder that I was building a life for myself slowly, painfully, but honestly. After a couple of weeks, the tone of Kimber's messages changed. It's not fair to the kids, she wrote. Ava and Lucas miss you. Don't punish them for our mistakes. That stung, of course it did, but I held my ground. I was not going to be drawn back by guilt or neediness, not again. I called my lawyer and set up a modest education trust for each grandchild, enough that they would know their grandmother had loved them, even from a distance. But I kept my boundaries firmed up. By the end of the month, the storms started to die down. The calls came less frequently. Sometimes, when I walked by the old family photos in my hallway, the ones that still had Grant's smiling face at every age, I felt grief settle on me like a shawl. I let myself feel it. I let myself cry when I needed to, but I never once reached for the phone. The world did not end. My heart did not break all the way. Slowly, I realized I could keep moving forward. One cold morning, I got a letter in the mail from Grant. It was just a simple card with a short note, no apologies. Just the words, "I hope you're okay, Mom. The kids talk about you. I wish things could be different." I sat at my kitchen table and turned the card over in my hands, reading the words until the ink blurred. I knew that he missed the convenience of me more than the reality, but still, a piece of me mourned for the son I remembered, the boy I'd once held through fevers and nightmares. But I didn't call him back. Started making plans for my future plans. That had nothing to do with Kimber or Grant or anyone else's comfort. I met with my financial advisor and looked at houses and places I'd always wanted to live. Small towns with fresh air and real seasons, quiet streets where nobody knew my past. I started browsing art classes, thinking about volunteering at the hospital or the local food bank. I made lists, not of things I needed to do for others, but of things I wanted for myself. One evening, as I was returning from a walk in the park, my neighbor Mrs. Aldridge waved me over from her porch. She was a retired school teacher with a ready smile, always eager to chat about her rosebush or share stories about her grandkids. I joined her on the steps, and for an hour we sipped tea and laughed about small things, nothing dramatic. Just the gentle rhythm of two women finally at ease in their own skin. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I was apologizing for taking up space. That weekend, I put in an offer on a modest house outside the city, a white cottage with a little garden and a porch just right for a rocking chair. The real estate agent was surprised I could make a cash offer, but I just smiled. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. This was my future, my safe place. No more tiptoeing, no more proving my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. Packing up my apartment was bittersweet. As I filled boxes with photos, books, and the small treasures I collected over decades, I found myself sorting through memories both good and painful. There were moments when I wondered if I was making a mistake, if I should try once more. To reach out to Grant, to Kimber, to the grandchildren who had once lit up my world. But every time the doubt crept in, I remembered that night at their dinner table, the way they had discussed my fate like a business transaction, the way I'd been reduced to a problem to be solved. So I packed my things and loaded them into the moving van, one careful box at a time. The last thing I took down was a faded picture of Grant as a boy, his gap-toothed grin shining up at me from a time when love hadn't been so complicated. I pressed the photo to my chest for a moment, then slipped it into a drawer. The day I closed the door to my old apartment for the last time, I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I walked into my new life, one step at a time, my head high and my heart a little lighter. Moving into my new house felt like stepping into someone else's dream. The walls were a soft, warm cream, the floors polished wood that glowed in the afternoon light. Outside, the little yard had space for flowers, maybe even vegetables next. Spring. There was a porch swing that creaked in the wind and big windows that looked out on fields, not highways or busy streets. It was everything I'd imagined on those long nights alone in my apartment, wishing for peace and not knowing if I'd ever find it. For the first few weeks, I lived in quiet amazement. I hung up new curtains, painted the guest room a cheerful blue, and learned the slow, steady rhythm of small-town mornings. My neighbor, Margaret, introduced herself one afternoon when she saw me struggling with a stubborn box of books. She was in her 70s with bright eyes and a quick laugh, the kind of woman who called everyone dear and always had cookies in her kitchen. She helped me unpack, and within a week we were sharing coffee on her porch every morning, talking about gardening and weather and all the little nothings that make a life feel full. For the first time in decades, I felt wanted. Not for what I could do or give, but just for being their dot, of course. There were still moments when the ache of what I'd left behind tried to drag me under. I missed Ava and Lucas, most missed their laughter, their questions, the simple joy of holding their small hands. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for my phone to send a picture or a note, then remembered that my boundaries mattered now, even when it hurt. I thought about the night I'd laid out my will and my records at Grant and Kimber's table, about the silence, the shock on their faces, the words they couldn't bring themselves to say. Sometimes I wondered if I should have handled things differently, if I should have fought harder or been softer, or tried to find some impossible middle ground where everyone could feel safe. But then I remembered every empty promise, every time I'd been left waiting, and I knew the truth. There had never been room for me in their lives, not as I truly was. The call slowed and then stopped altogether. First, it was angry voicemails, Grant insisting I was overreacting, that families fight and get through it, that I was choosing pride over love. Then it was Kimber sending long, rambling texts about how the kids missed me, how holidays wouldn't be the same, how maybe we could start over if I just apologized for my outburst. But I didn't answer. The apologies were for their discomfort, not my pain. A month after I moved, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a card from Ava, written in careful block letters. Dear Grandma, I hope you are happy in your new house. I miss you. Love, Ava. I pressed the card to my lips and let myself cry, not just for the loss, but for the hope that maybe one day she'd understand why I had to go. Margaret saw me crying on the porch and came over without a word, just held my hand until I could breathe again. It gets easier, she promised. You find your people again, one small kindness at a time. I believed her. With every passing day, I let myself belong more to my new life. I joined a book club at the library and volunteered at the animal shelter, walking dogs and listening to the quiet wisdom of other women who'd started over late in life. I spent afternoons in the sunshine, working in my little garden, dirt under my fingernails and sweat on my brow, amazed at how simple happiness could be. I never told anyone in town about the lottery. I didn't want to be that woman who won the jackpot. My neighbors saw me as Evelyn, the kind woman with strong opinions and good recipes, the friend who always brought flowers or a pie to gatherings. I paid for what I needed and gave quietly to those who had less. I put money aside for Ava and Lucas. Interests they wouldn't find out about until they were old enough to decide what kind of relationship they wanted with me. Sometimes, late at night, I found myself sitting by the window, watching the stars and letting my memories wander. I didn't regret leaving, not really. I regretted that I'd had to. I regretted all the years I'd spent trying to earn love that should have come freely. All the ways I'd shrunk myself to fit into a family that only wanted pieces of me. Never the whole. But even on those dark nights, I was grateful. Grateful for the stubbornness that kept me going, for the strange miracle of a lottery ticket, for the kindness of strangers who became friends. One evening, Margaret knocked on my door with a basket of late tomatoes and a bottle of wine. "You're coming over," she said. "We're celebrating. I got my medical license renewal in the mail today. 50 years in nursing, and they still trust me not to kill anybody with my brownies." I laughed and hugged her, the sound echoing. In my quiet house, we sat together under the porch light, sharing stories about the worst bosses we'd ever had, about patients who'd changed our lives, about how it felt to finally live for ourselves. I told her about Ava and Lucas, about Grant and Kimber, about the way it all fell apart and how I was learning to put it back together. Margaret squeezed my hand. "They lost you, Evelyn. You didn't lose them. Never forget that." As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was building something new. Not just a life, but a sense of self that wasn't tied to anyone's approval or affection. I was allowed to be enough, just me, as I was. And for the first time since that night on the street with $8, I believed it. By the end of my first winter in the new house, I realized something had changed deep inside me. The loneliness was still there, but it didn't feel sharp anymore. It had softened into something like acceptance, a companion that reminded me of all I'd survived and the distance I'd traveled to find myself again. Life in the small town kept unfolding in gentle, predictable ways. Margaret and I became as close as sisters, always finding new reasons to laugh or swap stories over tea. On Saturdays, we'd visit the farmer's market together, buying bread and apples, trading recipes with neighbors, sharing the quiet joy of being remembered and included. I joined a group at the community center that painted ceramics for the local hospital, and I started to look forward to every new project, every new face that greeted me with genuine warmth. There were still moments when my heart ached for my grandchildren. Sometimes I'd see a little girl with curly hair and think for half a heartbeat that it was Ava, or I'd hear a boy's laughter and imagine Lucas calling my name. The trust funds I created for them grew quietly, and every few months I'd add a little more, marking birthdays and milestones from afar. I never wrote letters. I didn't want Grant or Kimber to twist my love into another accusation, but I hoped that one day Ava and Lucas would feel it anyway, the way a child feels. The sun, even when they can't see it. Spring brought color and hope back into my world. I planted daffodils and wildflowers along the porch, filling the yard with yellow, purple, and blue. The days stretched out with birdsong and the hum of bees, and I found myself humming too, sometimes without even realizing it. Every so often, Grant would send a message, usually just a short line or a photo of the kids, never asking questions or pushing for reconciliation. I read every one. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I smiled, but I never replied. Kimber stopped reaching out altogether, and the silence between us grew into something almost solid. I accepted it. I grieved it. But I didn't chase it anymore. The more I settled into my new life, the more I discovered what it meant to belong to myself. I traveled to the next town over for a weekend retreat, staying in a bed and breakfast just because I could. I took a pottery class and brought home lopsided bowls that Margaret insisted were charming in a Picasso kind of way. I began to trust my own choices, to delight in my own company. One afternoon, as I was working in the garden, a little voice called out, "Hi, Miss Carter." It was Sam, the boy from 2 doors down, waving as he rode his bike by. His mother smiled and waved too. That small gesture, that easy belonging, was more healing than anything Grant or Kimber could ever have offered me. In that moment, I realized that love could be found in new places, in new people, in the small, kind rituals of daily life. Sometimes I wondered what Ava and Lucas would remember about me when they were older. Would they remember my hugs, my silly songs, the cookies I baked? Would they ever ask why I disappeared, or would my absence become just another story their parents told them? I hoped that one day they would find the truth, the real story, not the version shaped by someone else's. Pride. As summer approached, I felt peace settle in my bones. My savings, my secret windfall remained untouched except for what I needed. I gave quietly to neighbors who struggled, donated to the library, paid off Margaret's medical bills when she broke her wrist. I never wanted money to turn me into the kind of person who counted affection by what others could give in return. The best gift was the life I built, the courage to walk away, the strength to keep my heart open in a world that had tried to close it. On the anniversary of the night Grant and Kimber left me on that dark street, Margaret and I made a ritual of sharing a bottle of wine on the porch, raising a quiet toast to all the women we'd ever been and all the versions of ourselves still waiting to bloom. We talked about love, the ways it can wound, the ways it can heal, and how sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. That evening, as the sky turned pink and gold over the fields, I thought about all the years I'd spent searching for acceptance. I realized I'd finally found it, not in my family's approval, but in my own gentle, unwavering acceptance of who I was. The freedom that came from choosing myself was the truest wealth I'd ever known. Now, when I look back at the road that brought me here, I don't see only loss. I see a woman who learned to stand alone and stand tall, who turned pain into strength, who refused to shrink any longer for anyone's comfort. I see a survivor. I see me, and as I stood on the porch, breathing in the soft evening air, I whispered a promise to myself, one I intended to keep every day from now on. Never again will I ask for permission to belong. I am home. Summer settled over the little town like a warm embrace, and for the first time in my life, I woke each day with nothing to fear. My world had become simple sunlight on the kitchen floor, the laughter of children playing on the street, the soft creak of the porch swing as I sipped my morning coffee. There were no deadlines, no obligations, no frantic calls from people needing something they never offered in return. I was finally free to shape my days as I pleased, and with every passing week, I grew a little more comfortable in my own skin. Margaret and I spent long afternoons in the garden, pulling weeds and sharing stories about the lives we'd led before. We found each other. She talked about her late husband and the years she'd spent teaching children to read. I told her about being a nurse, about the patients who'd stayed in my heart and the moments that made me feel proud. We both confessed the hurts our families had left behind, but we didn't let that sorrow define us. Instead, we made a habit of looking for joy in small things, a bluebird on the fence, the smell of fresh bread from the oven, the discovery of a new wildflower blooming by the mailbox. I felt lighter every day. I went for walks along country roads lined with wild daisies, waving at every neighbor and stopping to chat about weather or recipes or whatever news mattered in our quiet corner of the world. There was an unspoken kindness among the people here, a willingness to show up for one another without keeping score. I wondered if I would have learned this lesson sooner if I'd known such a place existed, a community that didn't ask me to prove my worth every time I reached out my hand. 1. Sunday morning, I woke to find a small envelope slipped under my front door. My name was written on the outside in childish print. Inside was a drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun, one with brown hair, one with gray. In the corner, a heart. No signature, but I knew, Ava, my heart squeezed tight, a bittersweet ache. It was a message she'd sent across distance, across silences she didn't yet understand. I placed it on the mantel next to my favorite photo of her as a toddler and let myself cry, but not with regret. I cried because love, even wounded, finds a way. Days passed and I found new routines to anchor my life. I volunteered at the food pantry, helped organize a yard sale for the animal shelter, baked pies for the local school fundraiser. My house became a gathering place for neighbors who needed a cup of sugar, a listening ear, or just a quiet moment on the porch. I began to understand what it felt like to be needed for nothing more than my kindness, sometimes the ache for my old life flared up. I missed Grant, or the boy he'd once been, the way he would grab my hand on the way home from school, the way he used to laugh with pure, unguarded joy. I missed Lucas and Ava, the way their eyes sparkled when I surprised them with a treat or a story. But missing was not the same as longing. I didn't ache for their approval anymore. I didn't beg for scraps of affection or lower my voice to fit in their world. I honored my own voice now. I honored my worth. One afternoon as I weeded my flower beds, Margaret came over with a plate of warm cookies. "You seem happier than I've ever seen you, Evelyn," she said, handing me a cookie and sitting beside me in the dirt. "I am," I admitted, letting the words settle between us. "For the first time, I think I know who I am and I like her." Margaret grinned. About time. The rest of us figured it out months ago. We laughed until tears ran down our cheeks, and I realized that healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's found in small, safe moments with people who see you as you are. I spent that evening writing in my journal, reflecting on all the changes I'd made since that night on the cold street. I wrote about the freedom I felt, the sadness I'd let go, and the hope I'd found in places I never expected. I wrote about courage, about setting boundaries, about loving from a distance. I wrote a letter to Ava and Lucas that I never intended to send, telling them that their grandmother loved them more than words could say, that sometimes grown-ups make hard choices to protect their hearts, and that love doesn't end just because someone leaves. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the window, I stood by my garden and watched a pair of bluebirds build a nest. I thought about all the ways I'd rebuilt my life, not from riches or revenge, but from the quiet, stubborn insistence that I deserved better, that everyone does. I breathed in the warm air and promised myself that no matter what, I would never go back to a life where I was only valued for what I gave. I was home, and for the first time in my life, I believed I deserved every bit of it. 2 years passed. Each season stitched new color into the tapestry of my life. I learned to savor the quiet, how the sun rose pink over the fields, how the porch creaked under Margaret's feet, how laughter sounded different when it came from friends instead of family. Sometimes when I swept the floor or watered the flowers, I caught myself humming small, content sounds I hadn't made since I was a girl. My world kept growing. The women at the senior center became my sisters in resilience. The library hired me part-time to read stories to children, and every week I was surrounded by wide eyes and questions, sticky hands clutching mine. Neighbors stopped by for tea, for comfort, for company, and each time I felt that I belonged a little more. There was no need to explain my past or apologize for how I got here. My life, once built on sacrifice and silent desperation, now stood on a foundation of choice and self-respect. Of course, there were days when the old ache came back, usually around birthdays, holidays, the soft hours when families gather. I'd see Ava or Lucas in the faces of the children at the library, hear their laughter in the wind. Sometimes I'd walk to the post office, hoping for a letter or a drawing, and sometimes one would come, a crayon card, a school photo, a short note in Ava's careful hand. I kept them all. I never replied, but I sent small gifts for birthdays and graduations through my lawyer, always with a note, "For your dreams, from Grandma." I hoped that when they were older, they'd understand. I hoped that they'd know they were loved, even from a distance. Grant's messages came less and less. The last time we spoke, his voice was quiet, almost humble. "I hope you're happy, Mom. I'm sorry for the way things happened. I wish I could change it." I told him the truth. "I am happy, Grant. And I wish you well." I hung up feeling sadness, yes, but not emptiness. I had learned how to miss someone without letting the longing eat me alive. One golden afternoon, I sat with Margaret on the porch, our hands wrapped around mugs of tea. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Her question was gentle, without judgment. I thought about it honestly. I regretted that I hadn't stood up for myself sooner. I regretted all the years spent chasing crumbs from a table where I never really belonged. But I didn't regret leaving. I didn't regret choosing myself, not for a single moment. I regret waiting so long to become myself, I told her. But I don't regret being here. Margaret smiled. Good, because we'd all be lost without you. That evening, I watched the sun sink behind the trees, the sky streaked in violet and gold. I felt gratitude flood through me, not for the money, though it had changed my life, but for the strength to walk away and the courage to build something better. For the people who became my family when blood let me down. For the girl inside me who finally learned she didn't have to beg for love as darkness fell. I went inside and wrote in my journal one last time. I wrote for Ava and Lucas, for all. The women listening who've been called dramatic or needy, for anyone who's been left behind by those they loved most. I wrote, "You are not a burden. You are not too much. You are not invisible. The world can be cruel, but you do not have to shrink for it. Sometimes love means walking away, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself. And sometimes the life you find on the other side of heartbreak is richer than you could ever imagine." I closed the journal and sat by the window, watching the first stars appear. I thought about all the endings I had survived, all the new beginnings I created with my own hands. To anyone listening to my story, I want to ask, what would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever found your courage in the darkness or discovered family where you least expected it? Let me know where you're listening from, because your stories matter too. Thank you for walking this path with me. Wherever you are, may you find the strength to choose yourself, the freedom to begin again, and the peace that comes from knowing your worth. I'm Evelyn Carter, and this is not the end of my story. It is just the beginning.